portrayal of vulnerability, the portrayal of young adults' vulnerability and how these young adults navigate this vulnerability in the texts. The third objective was to explore power dynamics in the selected fictional works as the young adults seek power and autonomy in a world controlled by adult figures. My research questions were drawn from the research objectives. How do the selected writers construct young adulthood as a specific fictional demographic category and young adult identity? How is the young adult character's vulnerability portrayed in a world controlled by adults, and how does this character navigate it? And thirdly, how do the selected writers depict power dynamics in the selected works? And as the young adults seek power and autonomy in a world that is dominated by adult figures. It is not moving. My scope, chairman and members of the panel, was I looked at the fiction of 3 Ugandan women writers, namely Barbara Chimenye, Mary Karoro Okurut, and Glida Namukasa. And I looked at 11 novels and short stories. And these are the novels and short stories that I analyzed. Moses in Trouble, Moses in a Muddle, Pretty Boy Beware, and Beauty Queen by Barbara Chimenye, then Child of a Delegate, Letter of a Daughter to Her Mother, and A Virgin for a King by Mary Karoro Okurut, plus Voice of a Dream, The Pact, and Girly Surprise by Glida Namukasa. My choice was influenced by protagonist identity, by genre, and author gender. All the protagonists in the books that I looked at are young adults. They are young adult characters. And the fiction, all the novels and short stories are, of course, a fiction genre. And I selected this genre because it is one that is mostly published in Uganda. Therefore, it needs much more attention than the other genres. The authors I selected are Ugandan women writers because I feel that there is still little engagement with works authored by women, and yet women have a special way of representing reality, particularly the reality of female young adults. The works that I selected were published between 1967 and 2006, because this is the time when writing for and about young adults began to gain ground in Uganda. Of course, there are other books that would fit in that category, which I have described, like Lydia Ntindyewa's A Recipe for Disaster, and Goretti Chomhendo's The First Daughter, but I picked a representative sample. I picked Chimenye's books, especially because they feature young adult characters as in an environment, in a school environment, in cities and in towns. And they also target young adults. They target a young adult audience and describe young adults in the process of self-discovery and self-assertion. I selected Karoro's fictional works because they are invested in feminist discourse, and the characters in her works are geared towards promoting the position of a woman in society and the position of a woman, the visibility of a woman on the literary scene. She also engages female young adults to transform the societies that she describes in her literary works and to address societal issues. Namukasa was picked on, her works were picked on because she's a contemporary writer who looks at gender and young adults in a contemporary way, and she talks about young adults in a manner that is slightly different from the other two authors. So she gave my study a comparative edge. Chairman and members of the panel, for the theoretical framework, I used a pluralistic approach. That is to say that I combined three theories: the post-colonial theory, the sociological literary theory, and the feminist literary theory. The sociological literary theory posits that literature reflects social phenomena. Literature is a vehicle of social analysis. Literature comes out of a people's history, a people's destiny. It describes the society where it is coming from. Literature is a result of social needs, and literature is there for social application. So I saw these postulates fitting very well with the literary works that I engaged with. The post-colonial theory was used to supplement the sociological literary theory because, like the previous theory, it also addresses socio-political, economic, and cultural issues from the settings of the texts. So it engages the conflict between the colonized and the colonizer, bringing about questions of identity and otherness. And in my work, I was looking at the colonized being the young adult and the colonizer being the adult in their lives, who look at them as inferior, they look at them as subordinate and subaltern, and so locate them in the space of other. I also looked at the postulate of subject construction and resistance, because the young adults do not just take it lying down. When they are placed in those positions, they resist them, as is seen in especially the novels, the Moses series. You see that the young adults, even when they are subjected to those subjugated conditions, they fight them off. So another principle of the post-colonial theory that I looked at was the link between literature and the social, cultural, political context from where the works come. I also considered the question of language. All the books are written in the English language, which came to us because of our colonial connections with the British Empire. And also, when I contextualized it in my study, the young adults are subjected to a layered kind of language, a veiled language, which when the adults use it, sometimes they don't understand it and it leads them into problems. Then I supplemented the two theories with the feminist literary theory. This was imperative for me to use because all the fictional works are written by women and the central characters, most of the central characters are female. The postulate of identifying distorted images of women was specifically coming out in the short story, A Virgin for a King, the novel Voice of a Dream by Namkasa, and Child of a Delegate by Mary Carol Okrut. I also looked at the postulate of doing justice to feminist points of view, values, and concerns. And according to Butler, Judith Butler, women writers write their bodies, they write their desires, and they unleash their power. I was looking at this one as I analyzed the way women writers are writing the young adult who is another marginalized entity as they are. So I also imbibed from the woman, the postulate of woman as a social and ideological construct. And I saw this one very relevant, especially in the short story, A Virgin for a King. I realized that the author's construction of marginality was guided by cultural, domestic, and other social inequalities. Chairman and members of the panel, my literature review and establishment of the knowledge gaps was guided by the themes of Ugandan literature, the genre that is written in the genres of Ugandan literature, the theories that the scholars use to buttress their studies, and author gender. I looked at the dearth of scholarship as far as young adults and their representation is concerned. I also established the fact that scholars have used the theories like I have used them, but none of them has combined the three theories like I do. Then I especially looked at the conceptualization of the young adult differently from the way my study is looking at the young adult. These other scholars conceptualize the young adult as a child. They conceptualize the young adult as a symbol of innocence in, say, situations where there is war, civil wars, and violence and bad governance in a country. They conceptualize the young adult completely differently from the way I conceptualize the young adult. I look at the young adult in his or her own fictional demographic category. I look at the young adult as a young adult, not as anything else. I realized that the existing literary studies have eluded this identity of young adults, and the examples were many, among which studies by Linda Spencer, Marie Kruger, Abbas Chiimba. I also realized that fiction is a marginalized genre, and this was manifested in a very important literary text that puts across literary essays in Uganda. It is a book entitled Uganda, the Cultural Landscape, and in it there are 4 essays on poetry, 4 essays on drama, and just 1 essay on fiction. And even in that essay, written by Eckhard Brittinger, the females are even marginalized in that one. The essay on fiction is basically talking about fiction written by male authors, and there is just an honorary mention of Barbara Chimenye and a page and a half of Brown. Just the 2 women are mentioned, and they are just mentioned briefly. My methodology, chairman and members of the panel, was structured under the research philosophy, the research design, the research approach, data collection procedure, sources of data, data collection methods, research instruments and devices, data recording, and data processing. I used the interpretivist research paradigm because it harmonizes very well with literary studies, especially its tenets of hermeneutics and constructivism. It promotes the looking, the individuals are perceived differently. These different perceptions of individuals in the world they live in, I was looking at it from my perspective, for the perspective of my study, and looking at the way the different writers look at, narrate the young adult. And then I also looked at the way the different scholars perceive young adults. And the postulate of the truth of the world is a reflection of their perception. I was looking at it and scrutinizing the way the writers portray young adults in relationship, in relation to the real young adult in the world. The fact that there is no objective reality was a postulate of interpretivism that guided my study. And the differences in opinions and perceptions and representations and narrative techniques was auguring very well with the interpretivist philosophy. For the research design, I used a concurrent research design that was both descriptive and analytical. I looked at the 11 novels and short stories. I described the character, the subject matter and the character traits of the protagonists. I was gleaning the secondary sources to see how the research questions I was addressing were being brought out in the secondary sources. I also I was basing my analysis and my descriptions on the qualitative research model, which promotes subjective interpretation of content and contextual meaning. I was looking at the content. Where do these works come from? Why are these writers interested in this, in portraying the young adults in this way? What is happening in the settings of these works? And I was asking, looking at the characters and looking at their physique, looking at their actions, looking at their reactions, looking at their thoughts and their speeches. And I was contextualizing everything from the books that I analyzed. I also interviewed 2 key informants. That was a writer, one of the writers who was available because Barbara Chimenye died in 2013, and Mary Karoro Okrut, at the time of writing my thesis, was too busy to give me an audience. So I interviewed one writer and I interviewed an expert in my subject area of children and young adult studies. I did this one to obtain rich and first-hand information about young adults. I collected the data doing close reading of the primary texts, and I also looked at the secondary texts. Both print and electronic, and I was gleaning them, looking at my subject, my area of interest, the identity, vulnerability, and power dynamics. But I also went ahead to see the related subjects like subjectivity, like marginality, and sexuality. The interview of a scholar and a writer was done purposively because those were the only ones that were available. And then the instruments that I used during my research were a textual checklist. On the checklist, it was guided by my research questions, the subjects that I was interested in, young adult identity, vulnerability, and power dynamics. My data was recorded after close reading and interpretation of the texts and other materials that I got from the secondary sources. I analyzed the data through guided interpretation. I was guided by the research objectives and the theoretical. I anchored my discussion on the theoretical framework. And then finally, I checked the quality of the data by making sure that all the observations I made were contextualized. They were very closely related to the readings that I got and interpreted from the texts. I then wrote a report following the BSU graduate handbook and submitted it. My findings, Chairman and members of the panel, the major finding of my study is that a sample of Ugandan women writers portray young adults in their fictional demographic category as young adults who are in search of identity, they are in search of self-realization, they are vulnerable to a number of hosts, and they seek power and autonomy. The young adults want to disturb the universe, as Roberta Silinga-Trites says in her book, Disturbing the Universe, Power and Repression in Adolescent Literature. And when they do this one, when they want to impact on the world, they want to self-assert, they want to show that they are human beings who are worth recognition. When they do these things, the adults in their lives see them can discover the world. And of course, when they do that one, sometimes they find problems, but other times they discover that they are empowered and they can make their own choices. On the question,
Excuse me, Madam Alice, can you share the screen again? We've lost you a while. You had gone off, and your slide and your screen has gone off also. Can you share again? Thank you. Okay, fine. Thank you.
yes. So on the question of vulnerability, the young adults, I found out, are vulnerable to a host of things. They are vulnerable to multifocal exploitation. They are exploited physically. The case of Adela in Beauty Queen, when she takes part in the beauty contest, she's beaten by the father, she's punched by the father, she's abused by the mother, that is verbal abuse, verbal exploitation. She's abused by the mother, and the sister Felicia in the school wants to expel her because she's linking being part of a beauty contest with looseness. She's looked at as a prostitute because she took part in a beauty contest. So she's also exploited financially when she's in charge of, she's the one who is the beauty queen and who is earning the money, but the adults in her life, the people of the beauty queen racket, they have her name on paper, and on paper she's rich, but in reality, the adults in her life take away all the money, to the extent that when she falls sick, she has no money to cater for her sickness, and she eventually dies destitute, you know. She has nothing. Then there is sexual abuse also for Adela. When she comes from the beauty contest, the father looks at her as a sex target and wants to have sexual relationships with her. Incest, that is, she suffers that, she runs away and goes to the sister, but she's like running from the frying pan to the fire because the sister now abuses her even more. Then in a letter of a daughter to her mother, the girl Nyami suffers a lot of sexual abuse. She is gang raped because she's abducted, and the abductees, the ones that abducted her, rape her. And there are so many. She loses count on the fifth one. She's gang raped and she ends up being pregnant. She is tortured. She suffers trauma. She can't contain that. She can't even talk about it. She suffers silence because her tongue is like tied because of the trauma that she suffers. So that is vulnerability of the highest order. She ends up, no wonder the story has the epistolary style where she's just writing a letter to her mother. Then the young adults also suffer. The young adults suffer sexual abuse. They suffer sexual abuse, especially in Pretty Boy Beware. This young boy who left the parents and went to live with guardians at the coast. Unfortunately, the guardians die. He is found, he finds himself in the hands of tourists, and they use him, they introduce him to homosexuality. Eventually, he's used as a child prostitute. They have sex with him through the anus, and he starts bleeding, and I think eventually he contracts HIV and AIDS, and he's just discarded. So this one makes them vulnerable to disposability. They are used and discarded like toilet paper. The boy Matthew in Pretty Boy Beware suffers that abuse at the hands of the pimps, of the big men that sleep with him. And when they no longer need him, they just discard him. The same applies to Adela when she's still beautiful and not sick. They use her, and when she falls sick, they just dump her. She's used like a commodity. She is commodified. She is commodified. She's like a racehorse. Yes, the vulnerabilities even stretch to young adults suffering from obscene pornography. Their pictures are taken when they are in the nude, and they are sold to tourists. They suffer most of these things, especially sexual abuse, because they are subjected to
Madam Arsi, you seem to be using two gadgets. Can you switch off one? That's why we are not getting you clearly.
Yes. Should I continue? Yeah. The young adults suffer from obscene photography. Their pictures are taken when they are in the nude, and they are sold at a high price. They also suffer substance abuse. They are subjected to taking alcohol, taking pills, and smoking bangi. And when this happens, they get into a state of lack of control of their lives. So they end up sleeping, especially like Matthew in Pretty Boy Beware. He ends up sleeping with those men, and they abuse him. They also suffer from linguistic vulnerability. They are called names, which names end up, when they end up becoming like those names that they are called. Adela, for instance, is called an investment, and she's actually used as an investment. And when the time comes when she's not useful any longer, she's discarded. This one is like a Nyankore proverb where they say that a bad name bewitches its owner. Linguistic vulnerability. Matthew is called a gold mine because he's a beautiful boy. That's why they call him pretty boy beware. And when they keep on sleeping with him and through the anus and abusing him and bruising him, when he contracts HIV and AIDS, he's just dumped. He's just dumped in hospital, and it's the father who comes to look after him. So the adults in his life that were benefiting, the pimps that were benefiting from the prostitution ring, do not care about him. He's disposed of. Young adults also are vulnerable to dependency on the grown-ups in their lives. They are vulnerable to dependency of the grown-ups in their lives, and this takes away their agency. The beauty contests are linked to sexual abuse and prostitution. Pornography is linked to promiscuity. This one is seen in when the boys Daudi in the Pact and Sandy in Voice of a Dream. When they look at pornographic magazines, they want to have sex. They start thinking of sex and wanting to have it. They even plan to have sex by the end of the term, thinking that when they play sex, they will have become men. They are gang raped. Young adults are gang raped, and they are impregnated, they are dehumanized. They actually suffer from what Nabtani calls troubled childhoods. On the question of power dynamics, although young adults are facing all these problems, they are in the subaltern positions and they are vulnerable. They have power. They try to exercise power, and this one is done through awareness. The street children in Child of a Delegate are aware of their dangerous street environment, and they acquire street wisdom, and they fight off those things that they are vulnerable to. Then education also empowers them. When Hero becomes a graduate, she's able to pick the other street children from the street and take them home, and she has done something to society. They are also empowered by their self-will, their integrity, their principles in God, and their insistence, their resistance to these evil things. For instance, Hero, she refuses to be bribed sexually by the academic registrar who wants to sleep with her so that he can give her a room, and the lecturer threatens her that you will not get a good grade if you don't sleep with me. She fights off those vulnerabilities because of her inner resource. She knows that she's a subject and not an object, and that empowers her. Then Azelu in A Virgin for a King is empowered in her narrative voice as she tells that story. She's a girl who is supposed to be made a wife for the king. She's supposed to sleep with the king before the king can go to consummate his marriage with the bride. So that means that if she's the wife of, if she sleeps with the king, she will never sleep with any other person, because no other person is allowed to sleep with the wife of a king. Now, for her, she resists this ritual marriage. This is a patriarchal vulnerability. She refuses it. She runs away, but of course she's apprehended. She only becomes safe when the king himself says, "It's okay, I'll not sleep with you." But everybody else is already waiting for her to sleep with the king. Then the power, Namfka in Voice of a Dream is empowered. She has the power to say no. She says no to her Aunt Naka's marriage suitors. She's determined to play, she's not determined not to play sex. She's determined not to lose track of her dream. So her determination empowers her. My conclusion, the conclusion of my findings is that there is a link between prostitution and tourism, as seen in Twitter Boy Beware. There is a link between pornography and sexual stimulation. We saw the boys who gaze at pornographic magazines, they end up wanting to play sex. There is multifocal exploitation. As I've already explained, the running of private schools is very problematic, and this was seen in the Moses series in the school called Mukibi's Educational Institute for the Sons of African Gentlemen. Then the importance of dialogue as far as young adults are concerned, I have already mentioned. The role of parenting to young adults' welfare is very crucial, because the young adults that suffer more vulnerabilities are those ones that are distanced from the parents. Then the need for technological rehabilitation was also noted, because people like Nyami who are traumatized during the abduction, they need to be looked at, they need to be taken to centers where they can treat their trauma. Then there is also need to note that young adults are always yearning for attention, for a listening ear, and for independence. My recommendations are that governments should look into the tourism industry so that it is safe for the people who participate in it. This is safe especially for the young adults. When the tourists come from abroad and they come this way with their dollars, then the countries should scrutinize how those dollars are used. The beauty contests also should be looked into so that the young adults do not suffer as a result. Then the internal wars, they also have their problems. There's traditional customs like ritual wifehood, then the running of private schools. Finally, institutions and families should promote role model involvement in schools and also parental involvement in the lives of young adults. Thank you for listening.
Time out. Thank you, Alice. Thank you for this long traveled journey. Members shall not consume more minutes. Let us invite our colleague who is here to share with us this thesis. Please, Dr. Chan, you are welcome.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me tonight? Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. First, for the invite, I want to thank ESU. Invite. I want to thank the right postgraduate organizing this session. I want to thank various departments present, those are not present as well. I want to thank
I think online are not here.
I think I will also follow the same format like you did. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry that those online have not been hearing me, but I congratulated the presenter for a fantastic presentation of the thesis entitled Representations of Young Adults in the Fiction of Selected Ugandan Women Writers. Alice, your journey has been a long one, and I assure you that it's not yet over, but we are going to walk it together. We are going to walk it with all of us who are present live in this presentation, and those who are also present online. I was very keen, and I noted that over 100 people have attended your presentation. I think we're 20 in here, I presume, and there are over 8 online. I think I want to congratulate BSU for a fantastic mobilization, for wonderful engagement with the public and academia. This is very useful. I think this kind of thing happens in Norway quite a lot. It happens in Uganda in a small scale. I've seen Makerere do it, but the magnitude of up to 100 people, honestly, I've never seen it. I've been in many dissertation defenses, up to 100 people. This is something big. Now, I'm going to go to the nitty-gritty aspects, the nitty-gritty things. First, generally speaking, Right, Alice, I'm going to go through the thesis, first of all, generally, giving my opinion, very sincere and honest feedback about the thesis. The study investigated how young adult characters are represented in the fictional works of selected Ugandan female writers. You picked on Barbara Chimenye, Beauty Queen, Pretty Boy, Beware Moses, Moses in Trouble, and Moses in the Muddle. Gladena Mokasa, The Voice of the Dream, The Pact, The Galip Surprise, America Rock Roots, Child of a Delegate, The Virgin of the King, and Letter of a Daughter to a Mother. The multi-layered fiction selection of the female writers from Uganda provides a panoramic view into the contemporary Ugandan literature, which interweaves with cultural, geopolitical, and socio-historical threads that reflect Ugandan native heritage. Your study justifies that although young adult characters are perversely featured in Ugandan literature, there are no critical studies on how they are depicted. This is my general perception about your thesis. The thesis aims at investigating the selected writers' construction of young adulthood as specific fictional demographic category distinct from other categories, with specific attention to the depiction of young adults' identity or identities. And he examined the portrayal of young adult characters' vulnerability in an adult-dominated world, and how these characters navigate it into the selected text, and exploring the depiction of power dynamics in the selected literary text as young adult characters seek power and autonomy. Generally speaking, I think this puts your thesis into context. It puts it into a very beautiful research perspective. It puts it into a very powerful theoretical context. It puts it into a very contemporary aspect of scientific research. The only bit that I need to point out right at the beginning is that, meanwhile, you've done all the tremendous work that you could do for a dissertation, there is no evidence to show. I was keenly listening to you as you present. There's no evidence to show that you published or you authored any paper. You did. I want to make it interactive. You did.
I respond.
You can, you're free, yes.
I have published a paper on young power dynamics in annals of language, and I have also published 6 poems on young adults with Journal for African English.
Oh, beautiful. I missed that. Why didn't you include it in the appendix or something like that so that it will come to our attention? I checked you also online. I didn't see the articles. I don't know whether they're peer-reviewed journals or they've been indexed by Google Scholars, and you know, I couldn't see them. You have the link. Oh, beautiful. Now, because you work at Elements of Publication, I think I want to give you credit for that. I want to give you a huge credit for that, because your publication has gone a long way in enriching children's literature from the Ugandan African perspective, and that is a huge credit as far as your dissertation is concerned. Now, I want to go to the work structure. Chapter 1. Alice, I'm going to first take you through my summary of your thesis, and then I'll come back to specific aspects that I picked interest, and aspects where I have just a few questions for you, just a few questions. You can answer them, you may not answer them, it's up to you. So you don't have to answer them anyway, all of them, but just make it interactive. Chapter 1 covers introduction, background of the study, problem statement, purpose and objectives of the study, justification and significance of the study, as well as theoretical framework. This is the epitome of a thesis as far as introduction is concerned. Well done. Chapter 2, you presented a review of relevant studies on and around the topic under the study. You gave substantial, comprehensive, selective, balanced, and evaluative assessment of the studies so far done within Uganda. This was very good. You looked at the literature from Uganda You went a little bit outside Africa, but still you came back to Uganda, particularly targeting young adult audience in particular. And in doing this, I think you identified what establishes the gaps in the research, and you addressed subsequent chapters that is going to come. That is chapter 3. Chapter 3 covers the methodology. But you looked at issues pertaining to the research philosophy and the research design. You looked at the tools, looked at data collection, data analysis methods deployed, and the procedure, tools, and instruments for gathering and storing and processing data. This, I think, was also good. You created chapter 4. It confused me. You created chapter 5. It confused me. You created chapter 6. I was confused. Wasn't this part of literature review? Wouldn't you think this would have been integrated in the literature review? Why did you have to create an independent chapter 4?
In the chapters, I was specifically looking at the research questions. So you will notice that in chapter 4, I was looking at the research question 1. Chapter 5, I was looking at research question 2. In chapter 6, I was addressing research question 6. And I specifically picked those novels and short stories that were fitting in exactly with identity, with vulnerability, and with power dynamics.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you. Actually, when I read it later, that's what I thought. You wanted just to stand out in your analysis because you looked at textual analysis. You're very deep. You looked at 7 books. I'm very convinced you read them because you gave very good critical analysis. You gave each a chapter. That was very good. Now, you provided chapter 7. Chapter 7, summary, findings, conclusion, recommendation, and suggestions for further research. That was good. The thesis is grounded in empirical research, which represents the original research. You predetermined and reviewed Ugandan African fiction literature. I think you stand out there to me. This was quite absolute. You have about 135 references, both cited and uncited, both cited and in text. This is absolute for PhD. Mostly original articles. You looked at original articles, and this demonstrates a high ability to synthesize and discuss scientific problems. When you look at the way you draw ideas from Aaron Musengezi, you bring in Kayana, you bring in Danson, all these writers, you've been improving very well with scientific literature, and I think that is good. In all, the soft copy I got of your thesis had 257 pages. I counted even the pages, you can imagine, because it was a voluminous book. And I was looking at the hard copy as well here. This is slightly more, but the soft copy I got came up to 257 pages, including 14 pages for appendices only. I want to congratulate you for appendices part of this research. You did good work. Although you put later. The other things that I will talk about later that I wanted to see in the appendices, I have not seen them. And give us why. And the appendices only contain 2 questionnaires. You could have made it better by including most of the documentary letters and postgraduates. Letters from the film, your budget, your plan, action, how you executed this research could have been in the appendices as well. I think that would enrich the appendix for this dissertation. I want to go to the nitty-gritty things now. I'm going to go to the main thesis. I'm going to go to the main thesis where I have questions for you. So be ready for these questions. They're not tough questions. They're not tough questions. You can respond to all of them. You can, Alice, once again, your thesis is here. I'm going to share it with you. It's going to be streamed there. I'm going to share my observations regarding the merits and demerits of each part of the dissertation with you and with the team of panelists here. This is my analysis, personal feedback. I have nothing about title, I have nothing about abstract, I have nothing about anything else. I'm going to go straight to the introduction part. I'm sorry to keep you waiting. Mr. Chairman, I am doing my best.
You are waiting.
Yeah, sorry about that, but I'm getting around there. I want to share the exact comment and the exact areas. She knows that this very well. Alice, you shall go straight to the statement of the problem. Are you there? Right. You give it about a page and a half. The problem to me is researchable. It has supported statements. However, you should have deliberately or unself-consciously imagined how your adult characters are capable of interacting with society as a whole in order to seize power. And they should be able to unsettle the force of adult desire. Because you notice that in the statement of the problem, the forces of adults on children, or the forces of adults, me and you are already adults. These are people between 10 to 15, I imagine. The forces that is behind them is just too much, it's overwhelming. I think you should have stated this either consciously or subconsciously in the statement of the problem, that these people are capable of seizing power because they are the majority. Even as the characters themselves remain the product of adult creation, we created them. The relationship to society they model transcends a simple one-to-one correlation of adult author desire and young readers' internalization. In terms of knowledge of fiction, these portraits of adulthood debate should address issues that are emerging now in children's literature. Issues like, in my view, religious censorship, educational legislation, cultural discourses, creative writing, and fiction publication. The statement that supports all the statement that supports the statement of the problem is perfect. But there is that little religious, educational, cultural, creative writing, and fiction publication. So it should have culminated into things like that. Now the objectives, your objective, let's go to the objective part. Research objectives. I want to go at your pace and very systematic like we did. Is it okay? Research objectives. Are we there? Yes. To investigate selected writers constructing young adulthood as a specific fictional demographic category, distinct from other categories with specific attention to young adults' identity. To to examine the portrayal of young adult characters, vulnerability in a world controlled by adult figures, and how these characters navigated into selected works, to explore the depiction of power dynamics in the selected works as the young adult characters seek power and autonomy from the world controlled by adult figures. Perfect, pragmatic. To me, they're all pragmatic. Broad enough, they will lead to the specific objectives, although should have stated the accomplishment of the young adults rather than individual characters. You loved Moses so much. You loved whole city, town so much. Now, could these characters speak for a group? That adult group, the adult group. Could that character speak for them? Could he not adopt an off-road voice? This is not a question, it's just a comment. Okay. Proceed on to the. I don't have any comments on the such questions. Justification of the study, I have no comment on justification of the study. Significance, I have no comment on significance. Let's go to theoretical framework. Theoretical framework. Theoretical framework. Alice, are you there? Theoretical framework. From my reading, I largely think that we mix up theoretical and conceptual framework. I largely think that we mix up conceptual and theoretical framework. Let me point out a few things about it then. Yeah. When you read the theoretical framework, the paragraphs that stand out clearly that this is supposed to have been addressed as conceptual framework, and the paragraphs that read that needs to be addressed as theoretical framework. I know this happens when you're writing a long piece of work like this at times. I'll appreciate. When you look at the paragraph that begins, paragraph on page 32, begins with the word, secondly, I scrutinize the actions of young adult characters. You've said it. In my view, this is purely conceptual framework because it's based on the ideas formulated after reading the text. And because of the good observation, I scrutinize the actions of what method you use to scrutinize the actions of these characters. So you need to align this section. Parts that will appeal to theoretical framework, parts that appeal to conceptual framework. So you have to see your engagement with the literature clearly. Several other paragraphs, I'll keep pointing them out for you. If you go to page 33, I investigated the selected works and distilled aspects that show an author who is committed to transforming and freeing certain categories of human beings. Are you there, page 33, maybe 32 in you? I investigated the selected Alisa and the theoretical framework. Yes. To me, this is the entire thing is mixed up. Elements of theoretical and conceptual framework. I see lack of differentiation in the formulation of theoretical framework. I see this clearly when I read this part of the thesis. Lack of differentiation in the formulation of theoretical framework and conceptual framework in this part of your thesis. Although both frameworks are tools, these are both tools that can assist you to make meaningful findings. They vary. They use them for different purposes. A conceptual framework bases on ideas that may be formulated from a researcher's own perception. This may be from the observation or from experience. On the other hand, theoretical framework is based on recognized theories. You have the theories. Very clear. That's the idea of your input, which could have come as a result of your experience, how you gathered your data, that part is lying. Just you could just speak. Now, a conceptual framework cannot be refuted or tested through a research because it's the whole idea. A theoretical framework is testable and can be rejected because it's a theory anyway. This theory works for this group, and this one also works for the other group, but the theory that works for this group may not work for the other group. So the theories that you've brought across are all perfect, but the concept embedded, the concept that you're trying to use to highlight the theories are not very clear to me. I have a question for you. I have a small question for you, Alice, here. Why have you bothered to include both frameworks? Why have you bothered to include both frameworks, theoretical and conceptual?
My reading and interpretation and my desire to anchor my argument on the theoretical framework brought me now.
Okay. Would you use a lot of your own experience in your profession to bring aspects of conceptual framework? Use your experience. Bring us closer to the aspect of conceptual framework in your work. So we see new conceptual input. Yeah, that's just my advice. Anyway, it's a journey that you still have to walk. I want to go to page 39. There's a statement. Page 39. Probably I'll come to that and we finalize this. This part of theoretical framework is conceptual framework, and it relates very well to existing knowledge. But you need to provide insights by offering contemporary analysis, while you need to also show how you identify gaps in the study, key factors, patterns, and relationship of the phenomena under study. Offer only well-founded conclusions. Some of your conclusions are not sufficient. Like if you look at page, my discussion begins with my discussion, pays attention to the social, cultural, and political context in which fiction works, page 34. Don't have any questions, but come back to that page and look at that paragraph, my discussion. Look at that paragraph again. Alice, looking at this theoretical framework, and you say that you published how many articles? 3?
2 so far, there are 2 others that are on the way. An article on vulnerability, an article on processes, where they are getting up, they seem to be getting up with circulation. And I'm looking at that, the disappearance of those books and trying to promote their coming up.
Brilliant, brilliant. Which other aspect of your work would you consider for publication?
Another article on the power dynamics. So, something in the literature.
Something from the literature review. Chapter 4, 5, and 6. That'd be brilliant. Okay, page 39, Alice, page 39. Begins with the paragraph reads, in a manner similar to other discourses on colonized peoples, African writers question the standards that Western criticism apply to their works. Similarly, in this study, I question the universality of adult readers' criticism of literature from that path. This statement is good. It helps the reader to go to the realm of the problem. The conceptualization of the topic is entirely made clear from this part of the thesis. And it's tended to adopt a lot more of personalized approach, which is a very good knowledge input from you. It enhances the reader's objectivity. When you read this part, you become very objective about the presentations of young adults in the fiction selected by the writers, and it becomes much clearer. Are there any differences between your own values? My question is, are there any differences between your own values and the values of the young adults' characters implicit in your dissertation?
Yes and no. Yes and yes. There are differences. Because if say we look at the young adults' value of independence, we have to measure the amount of independence that we give the young adults. It is okay, I agree that you can have independence, but it has to be measured. If you just let them free, then you get other problems. Then I'm entirely agree with their quest for attention, being listened to. I feel that one is pertinent because it improves their dialogue, seriously improves the relationship between any human being. Doesn't necessarily have to be in young adults, but in young adults in particular, it is something that is permanent, pertinent, and good. I agree with them as far as that is concerned.
Thank you. Go back to publication. The loads that you're going to keep in the shelves, at least if you don't publish this, if you don't publish some of these things, really, I don't know. There's a lot of publishable bits in your thesis, even that you just said. It's a brilliant one. Organization of the thesis. When I first read this book, I looked for this, I couldn't see it. Then I read it again, I just discovered it 3 days ago that you had included the organization of the thesis here. This is good signposting. This is how I was taught. Any piece of writing has got to show level of organization. You brought it out here clearly, 7 chapters, and you're ready to defend the 7 chapters. I can see in your presentation, you're very eloquent about them. I have no problem with organization of the thesis. Limitations in the study, conclusively, as far as chapter 1 is concerned, the introductory chapter here clearly establishes the problem that exists and the need for the study to be carried out. It borrows a lot from literature review, especially when the author is analyzing the study aims and objectives, statement of the problem, research hypothesis, significance of the study, and limitations of the study. However, the researcher should have constructed a simplified view of young adults that she wants to explicitly deal with in representations, not just representation, representations. Should have mapped out certain boundaries for your study and located to the literary fiction, not real characters and their encounters. Because the way you're engaging with Moses in Moses series, as if Moses is real. I think Moses is fiction. That's fine. Focus should have been on how authors imagine these young adults and their narrative positioning to the Ugandan readers. Narrative positioning to the, what do they bring out clearly to the Ugandan readers? The project did not provide concrete argument on how contemporary readers reacted to or are shaped by the reading. How would the contemporary readers? The Moses series already becoming very scarce in the market. I wonder where you got them from. So how would the contemporary reader react? for the story. From your writing, from your thesis, please make a case for this. Final question. What helps you improve your dissertation in the introductory part? What helps do you think will improve your dissertation here? Is that all you have?
Trying to foresee what the real young adults, if they are to read these particular texts, how they react, how they react to respond to stories.
Yeah, let me share that with you. And thank you so much. We're moving on to lecture review. Alice, you provided the most fascinating, the most gripping, the most provocative, the most absorbing, I don't even have the adjectives now, literature review using the stated, standard stated convention. I have read, this is almost the 6th dissertation I am reading. I think the style you adopted in writing literature review, I even cross-checked the latest thesis, latest dissertation presentation and literature review. Yours is outstanding. What did you do? You did something good. What did you do that was good? You structured your literature in a way that's so amazing. Let me look at the years. You did the years. Tell the audience what you did with the years, how you did it. Tell them how you did it.
Whenever I say dealing with literature of political terror, I start with the person who wrote something on that theme first, then I go to the next one, until I finish that thing. And whenever I put same gender, stereotype, and gender studies, I would again go in.
Additionally, the logical development of the literature review was very outstanding and classical. If you do 1986, you don't do 1985. You do 1987. You do 1988 up to 2011. That was classic. Keep it up. Although you should make attempts to analyze literature that are not older than 5 years, a lot more. It's not a big deal, but 5 years would be sufficient, and that will make your work luscious, palatable, and scrumptious. The literature review part is good. I have a small question for you, Alice. What published work is closest to your work as far as the literature review is concerned? And how is your work different from that work? And how does your work relate or differ from Aaron Mushenge's work?
The literature review, so we have published work close to my work is all things transgressing boundaries, gender, identity, culture, and other in the fiction of African women writers. But that work is different from mine because for her she had a wider scope. She was looking at African women writers, and she was looking at what is similar is her look at identity, and the way she looks at the young adults in her work is a way it is similar to the way I look at young adults in mine. I go beyond by looking at vulnerabilities and power dynamics.
In Uganda or in Africa?
In Uganda, I specifically look at Ugandan writing, specifically that writing by 3 women writers. Then the difference between one half and that one, Aaron James, for him, he's looking at oral literature and he looks at this, like that season, he looks at its promotion in culture and all that. And he looks at the protagonists, the characters in his work are actually children and all things. But me, I'm moving a little away from him because I'm looking at that age category between 11 and 19. And for him, he's looking at oral literature while I'm using fiction to be nice. But his methodology was very helpful in my life. The way he approaches children and their work is very similar to me. I think big leap for it.
Thank you so much for that. Last response. Alice, we're moving on to research methodology. I think I only have point of one thing. Page 60, research design. I started by saying that this study adopted descriptive design. And I said that descriptive design involved more than just a collection of data. In my view, they involve measurement, classification, analysis, comparison, interpretation of data. I see a solid and robust formulation of key research principles and solutions to significant problems, not just a mere collection of data tools. I concur and acknowledge your endeavors in this part. As we proceed to page 61 from the soft copy I have. Instead of saying the study employs a qualitative approach. Qualitative approach, in my view, seeks to describe behavior of humans or groups being studied. Perfect. We did that. Perfect. Qualitative research uses natural settings, e.g. classroom or laboratory. Now the means and the scenario is not artificial. It's largely naturalistic. The major challenge I see here is that you have not clearly spelled out the strategies. Your lab, where is your lab? Your lab or your textbooks? Okay. Yeah, you use interview, focus group discussion, questionnaires, etc. This would have allowed flexibility to relate to the particular aspects of the behavior of a group in a wider context. If you've gone extensively expansive and related your text to the current adults and interviewed them in relation to the text, you'd have got completely different answers as far as your vulnerability is concerned, because your research is pure and qualitative. Now, your research method, you have adopted either the phenomenological studies, studying subjects over a long period of time, should have given it time to study Moses series in relation to the current young adults in Uganda. That is the reality now, taking the book to them. Then ethnographer, you observe their behaviors with the books or what they do with the books. And you could also use a case study, uses so much data to investigate the subject over time and activity. This is just a suggestion. These are just my observation. Data collection procedure, I concur with you. I don't have any comment on that. When I come to sources of data, perfect, I agree with you. Sources of data, primary, the novels and short stories, perfect. They're yours, you chose them. I don't have to disagree with you on that. I have a question for you as far as data collection is concerned. What challenge did you face in data collection? How did you overcome them?
Data collection, especially that the secondary sources, the primary sources, those ones that it wasn't just so very easy, especially big books like Pretty Boy Beware and Beautiful, even the short stories by the number. But actually ended up going to same right where they were published and being given the original copies. The original script, which was not written in the form of publication, because I couldn't get the view of it. That was one problem. The primary sources, they not came to the secondary sources. It was also not easy because of the dearth of scholarship in young adults, dissertation in literature. It wasn't easy. So I would have to look at those jungle articles by people like old people and students and studies by Tiny and Shengetsi to see how I can fit in my English study. That was the then when it came to the interviews, interview just to as a writer and a scholar, the commission is the pioneer in children's literature. It was not easy to get the other writer medical law of it. It's very busy politician at the time when I was doing my interviews. It wasn't. That was the problem.
If you're to do this research today, would you Thank you. I'll go straight to chapter 4. Specially created chapter. The faith scientific thesis is acceptable. Depiction of young adulthood identity in Barbara Menye's Moses series and Gladys Namuka's short story, The Fact and the Surprise. You've been explicit in identifying the concept of young adulthood. Comes out clearly, is understood as being in the sense of belonging. That in the sense of belonging. But to what? Ethical, ethic, or ethnic, national, religious, racial, indigenous, sexual, or any of a range of otherwise effectively charged, socially recognizable group of people. This is among the most this part of your thesis is the most compelling to me because it raises a lot of contemporary issues about young adulthood in Uganda. Your geniosity was clearly seen here, in my view. You were very explicit in analyzing the two authors. Why did you put them together? Yeah.
These particular authors and these particular texts, you are dealing with, especially young adults in the school setting. And I saw that you are bringing out the testimony against the young people, especially that which trends was studying the universe. I was seeing young adults struggling with freedom, struggling in a quest for self-realization, wanting to assert themselves, and I saw it coming out very explicitly in this. The Moses series, the fact and the sacrifice, and especially the question of sexuality, where the young adults want to when they start thinking that the boys, that when they have sex, it will make them from boyhood to manhood, as opposed to what the girl thinks. For them, exemplified by Rachel, she thinks that she has to wait until she gets married to have sex, but the boys think differently. So I saw these texts bringing those ideas out very well.
Brilliant. How did the characters in Robert Kimenyi's Beauty Queen and Mary Karolo Ruth's letter to the daughter represent vulnerability in relation to the contemporary Uganda?
It's if it's the abduction in the north, those girls that were taken, that were abducted, imagine the way it is an imaginary story. It is related a lot to the real world stories. The abducted people must have suffered those atrocities like running. She was made to kill even a friend because the friend got tired. And the soldier said, you cut off the leg of your friend. And he suffered those atrocities. And when you read stories by Monica Ara, you discover that people actually suffered those atrocities. Because literature is based on social need and social application. To know that there are people who have suffered those atrocities and they are there, they are not being cared for, they are not in patient centers for them, I think that is happening. And then for little boy, the fact that the setting actually is the Mombasa coast, it is not mentioned, but you see that it is at the coast, Mombasa coast. And the tourism, the pimps, the prostitution, pedophilia, those are situations that are actually happening in places where tourists go and they use those young girls and young boys for sex. So it is really related to the real life situation.
Thank you, Alice. You exactly the way you're explaining is what I felt. You're so much in control of literature here. Please take it out of the book. Publish more. Just get yourself published a lot more. Definitely. Chapter 456 now analyzes young adulthood experiences systematically. Very, very systematic. In using this form of analysis, major concepts or themes emerge. Vulnerability is one of them. Suffering, alienation, loneliness. To me, this is so much enriched in your narrative reports. And with quotations from text that justifies this. This has really enriched your studies. You effectively uses attribution analysis. I call it attribution analysis. You take a trait of a character and attribute it to certain aspects, like you just related child abduction in certain parts of Uganda, child prostitution, etc. You use very powerful adjectives, you use very, very powerful adjectives, very powerful verbs in this part of your literature. Chapter 456, your description and phrases were very brilliant. And this contributes largely to the rigor of your dissertation. When someone reads this part of the dissertation in my view, it's quite rigorous. It's no child's play, someone picking 7 series and sleeping with them for 7 years, or working with them for 7 years. It's no child's play. No, that's my opinion. Yeah, that's a strict opinion anyway. However, in data analysis and representation, in a research of this magnitude, you should have been sure of the analysis sample. Were you sure of the analysis sample? Did you understand the assumptions of your study? And were you sure of the measurement tools? That's just a comment anyway. The question is, in one sentence, state the most interesting findings in your results. In a sentence.
Is that young adults are in need of additional care, they are in need of attention, they are in need of understanding from the grown-ups in their lives.
Thank you. I move to chapter 7 now. We're drawing close. Chapter 7. I said you're not working alone, we are together. I'm working with you, and I don't want you to follow. If you follow, I also follow. This section is well written. It pinpoints the contributions that research, it pinpoints the contributions that research will take or will make in the society. I don't want to point them. We did, they're very, very clearly pointed out in the slide. Why did you move to the last part, last bits? Work cited. Primary sources. Why did you just put them as work cited? Why not part of the main reference? And I want to congratulate you that all your references are MLA, Modern Language Association, 7th edition format. They meet the criteria. You had, apart from works cited, you had 137 other works that you used in your thesis. This is really absolute. And I went deeply into the literature review, and everything that you stated in literature review is in the reference. So thank you so much for that strength. This shows that you engage in other literature well. Your knowledge has increased, and definitely Uganda will benefit, and the entire world will benefit from this study if you can get off the shelves, because this is a very interesting genre, children's literature. It's an emerging genre of literature, particularly representation of young adults. I have never seen it anywhere. Read and research, I've not seen it anywhere. You picked on a very unique area, and you used quite a number of works effectively to bring out your ideas. Finally, last but not least, appendices. You only had to. You had to interview questionnaires in the appendix. What about things like budgets? Where did you put them? Budgets. Things like letters from the postgraduate. Things like the work plans, dissertation plans. It is a thesis. To enrich your appendix. Otherwise, I have nothing more to say, Alice. Wish you the best of luck. Presentations of young adulthood in the fiction of selected Ugandan women writers. Finally, maybe final and the last. What are you thinking as your career after this?
I expect to be an expert in that particular branch, young adulthood, in Uganda, and promote the teaching of it. Because those texts, they are so interesting, they are small, and students will not feel it. It is a burden to read them. So they can be studied at university level by undergraduates and even postgraduates. So I'm looking at promoting the reading of literature that features young adults.
Okay.
And maybe even influencing the National Culture and Development Center to start putting those kinds of books in the syllabus, especially for O and A.
Okay, finally, just a comment. Have you applied for any job anywhere?
Not yet.
Okay, use your publications and apply for jobs and become a publisher. Thank you. May God bless you. And Chairman, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. We've enjoyed sharing it. Maybe Alice, if you have any other comment you want to share with us from your interaction. Is there anything you left unanswered that you want now answer for us to appreciate?
Like to give something, just a small point among the ones adult character. The young adult character. I am fearless of demonstration, a practical exercise for teachers, poets, scholars to teach, to study. As a beauty queen, an object on display, I preach decency and safe sex. To the child of a delegate who advocates girl-child rights and promotes the gender agenda. When things fall apart, I run away with the white men to expose the darker side of Africa. And as a houseboy, my fate, pathetic, used and abused, I preach morality despite being warned that, pretty boy, beware of the pedophiles. Expose their evils. While in the voice of a dream that is sought at a great cost, my dreams are shattered. Although in the Moses series, adventure is my toll, though teachers and administrators won't let me be. I want to walk in their world, see myself in their mirror. I want to dream, to search, to find. I want to face my fears and dry my tears. Dear writers, scholars, all, please let me be me.
Right. She was providing an answer to the opponent. Thank you, Dr. Chan and Alice. Now, we are going to panelists. Online, we have Professor Okot. I think let's start with Professor Okot, who is away, and we end. The theory should start from near the known, from the known to the unknown. But let us start with Professor Okot. Professor Okot, are you online? Professor Okot.
There is an echo. I'm sorry. Are you addressing me?
Being Okot is not yet ready. Let us now go to panelists who are here. Dr. Noel, what are you putting across?
Doctor, there is an echo, please.
There is an echo.
Yes, please.
Okay, maybe let me call this expert, check the echo. They are saying there is an echo. Dr. Noel, what is your view?
Hello?
Dr. Noel?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Alice, for that good presentation. I must congratulate you that it hasn't been a simple journey. Thank you very much. I have two observations.
No, Dr. Noel,
just quick one.
Let us first deal with the panelists and then we go to the ladies last.
Okay.
If you have an observation, let us first deal with the panelists.
Okay.
Yes, in this house, we have 3 panelists here.
I'm not getting you.
Let us start with any that is ready. Examiners. Yes, please. Yeah. Dr. Carlo is starting. Dr. Carlo, you are welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm starting with, I've been asked by the graduate school to present comments from the external examiner. And I think I'll pick highlights in the interest of time, because some of the comments will be given to the candidate and she will look at them and work on them accordingly. First, the abstract is generally well presented. It highlights what the study investigated, the procedures used to carry out the study, the key findings and conclusions. The candidate should avoid using the passive voice and clarify some of the statements that are not well spelled out, like the study adopted an interpretivist philosophy to interpret. Those ones should be worked on. The table of contents, there are some issues to address. We look at them, the text, especially chapter 4 and 7. Another technical part, now we go to the introduction. That part, it is proposed that it should be renamed introduction. And then that section 1.1 should adequately present the major focus of the study in general and its key arguments. Section 1.2 and 1.3, one would have been expected, would have expected the candidate to present a broader understanding of literature for young people as a genre and various subgenres therein. This background then would lead her to a broad overview of the study. The problem statement, the problem is well stated, and the candidate should clarify why the elided identity is a elided identity of young adulthood. This issue should concern literary critics and therefore worth investigating and should attend to the run-on lines. I'll just pick a few and move on. Then objectives and the research questions, they are well stated. The notion of power relations in this text is based on the desire by young adult characters to seek power and autonomy from the adult world. And this is an overstatement. They are saying the desire for more freedom, fun, and entertainment may be more reasonable claim. The theoretical framework, the candidate explained in detail her choice of the social and post-colonial theoretical approaches, and she outlines the concepts of these theories that apply to her study. However, specific theorists of children's literature have not been cited, e.g. Peter Hunt's book, Criticism, Theory, and Children's Literature, he advances a childish approach to children's books. And then this would provide privileges to the child-centered approach to what the story or the study is about. Also, Hunt cautions the adults against making assumptions of what children like to read or ought to read. Instead, he emphasizes counter-reading, the fact that adults should cast away their stereotypes and reread texts and appreciate them from the child's point of view. There's also another book, Media for Young People in Uganda, An Introduction to Theory and Practice, which is a collection of various essays on the subject. They also provide a comprehensive overview of children and young adult literature issues on a Ugandan context since the colonial era. The literature review, chapter 2, is adequately written, but the candidate has focused largely on studies about adult fiction rather than texts for children and young adults. So there's quite a large corpus of works should have been centered on. Research methodology explains the procedures and tools used to collect data. But in most of the sections, the details provided are scanty. So should provide more details. Why did you prefer a certain collection method other than the other? How many respondents, male and female? And then those interviewed. Then elucidate more on the procedures used in data processing and analysis. Presentation and discussion of findings. The candidate discusses the way the authors depict young adult characters, identity, their desire for independence and autonomy, as well as the discovery of their sexuality as young people. And I think in chapter 5 discusses the question of vulnerability. Both sexual and drug abuse are depicted. Means fiction. Chapter 6 is an argument that young people too demonstrate power to overcome their situations of vulnerability, despite the constraints that limit their agency and struggle for self-sovereignty. The overall candidate's arguments are well thought out and consistently presented. And there are areas that are noted for improvement, and the details will be given to the candidate for review. And in conclusion, the conclusion chapter, it should be renamed conclusion. That's chapter 7. The candidate doesn't raise a number of interesting conclusions, and these are probably appropriate, and this does raise a number of interesting conclusions, and these are appropriately summarized in that chapter. At this point also is to concentrate on summing up the general findings, conclusions, and recommendations, and check through the works cited and correct those that were not properly cited. They are also indicated, and in general, the study is a useful contribution to the understanding of the adult literature. And the other report also in summary form. The second report, the general comments are that the overall product is of very good quality. And the general presentation of data as well as its analysis and discussion is a challenge, especially with clear demarcation between presentation, analysis and interpretation of data results, and discussion of findings and results. So the preliminaries, they were generally managed. Introduction, it contains the essential components of the first chapter. The sections 1 and 2 are providing well the background. And the section that is missing is definition of key terms. Could be 1.5, definition of key terms. And then the issue of theoretical framework. It should be clearly spelled out from the beginning that the study is employing a number of particular theories, 3 theories, and with the defense of why each particular theory is included. The literature review is commendable, and the strongest feature is the contemporariness of the reviewed scholarly studies. Secondly, the brief introductory section. The review comprises of 1 block and relevant prose. The said block could have been parceled up into sections to Ugandan and non-Ugandan critics, female or male critics, etc. And third, different studies by the same critic should have been disposed of in the same space instead of reverting to the same critic at a later page. Our research methodology is well laid out. However, the candidate needs to make a distinction between data collection and analysis. And the presentation and analysis of data or results. Each chapter of the 3 core chapters 4 to 6 is respectively built around one of the 3 objectives of the study. That is the young adults, namely young adults identity, young adults vulnerability, and young adults power dynamic and autonomy. And each chapter examines a varying combination of 2 or more or 3 selected writers. But in a curious way, it says, should have presumed to be the case, these 3 key terms appearing in one objective. At best, these presumed main manifestations of young adults should have been hypothesized, that is to say, presented as tentative or projected characteristics whose presence is yet to be proved. As it turns out, in each of the consecutive chapters, the candidate searches for behavioral attributes which qualify to be grouped under these predetermined behavioral categories. And as a possible way out of the above, the 3 chapters 4 to 6 could each have been respectively built around 3 selected women writers, Barbara Kimenye, Mary Karolo Krut, and Glida Namukasa. And then the ensuring elements of identity, vulnerability, and power dynamics and autonomy would have been discerned as key variables running through the text and the study. Another organizational challenge, those ones they'll be given to the candidate to address them. Then discussion of findings. We are saying research report should have constituted a separate subsequent chapter in the BSU graduate handbook. These will be handled at a graduate, and then the candidate will handle them with the graduate school or directorate. summary of findings in chapter 7, there is no mention of any related to any findings of the 3 cardinal characteristics of young adults. Youth contained in the 3 objectives. And lastly, the summary of findings, the candidate's emphasis is not on how the young adults are represented, but on the moral or societal lessons to be learned by the reader from the themes that are depicted, e.g. prostitution, pornography, lack of sex education, poor private schools, poor parenting. And the only salient point directly linked to the objective and representation of the young adults is about their need to be heard and listened to by the world. This is a good presentation. That originality is okay, and the structure of the presentation is all given. The rest are put in the details that will be given to the candidate. Thank you so much. And personally, I'll just make comments because what I would have made most of the comments have already been talked about. I also congratulate the candidate upon reaching this stage of the journey. One thing that has been coming up, I think, even from what the opponent raised and then from the reports we have just had, there's an issue of why the representation of the young adult in the fiction, whatever is in that representation, what could be its cause? And then now, what are we looking out for? Because yes, they are writing, it is literature, but literature has a role of contributing to society. What has been causing all this that they are writing about? There are different or there are various structural inequalities. We have issues that have come up, the cultural constructs, the religious constructs, as the opponent talked about them. How have they contributed to what is being written about by these writers? They are female writers. They're also using the feminist theory, either as a theory, I don't know whether we can take it up as an analytical framework there. And then we look at how the structures are created, those power relations. How do they come about in our society? So that now when we are looking at whatever is happening to the youth, is it a reaction to those cultural structural inequalities? Is it a reaction to those power inequalities? Whatever they are doing, when we have those structural inequalities, in most cases, they will bring about structural violence. When the youth are protesting or are contesting something, why are they doing it in the society? What is the implication of this literature to our society today? I will implore the study now, the candidate to get that argument, sorry, not an argument, it is there in the text, but as we make our conclusions and recommendations, it should have that contribution to our society in which it now brings into the light those structural inequalities and how they bring about those other challenges of people fighting for power. Why? From which kind of power even are they fighting? There are those cultural ties, there are those religious ties, there are even those gender power-related ties where we are tying our youth or our children that we are supposed to be like this, but they are saying for us we are supposed to be like this. And we see the way they are doing it, they are reacting to those structural systems that are there. And we need to bring it out in our recommendations so that it informs us or it contributes to our social and national development. Thank you so much. Mine was a comment, wasn't a question.
Thank you, Dr. Carlo, for that elaborate contribution. Let's continue to another panelist. I can see Dr. Busimba is preparing to speak. Dr. Busimba, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank God for this occasion. Congratulations, Alice. I want to rephrase Dr. Chan's comment that from now on the journey will be smooth, although it's not yet over. So whatever I speak, I'll be speaking from the perspective of a smooth journey henceforth. I think from the reports that my neighbor here has just read, you can tell that the journey has already begun getting smooth, and therefore congratulations. Dean Chair and members here and online, thank you for your presence, your contribution, and we hope everything will turn out as it should be. We look forward to addressing Alice as Dr. Alice Jossy Kyobutungi. Let me begin from one comment that I read from Mr. Chan's text. It's a famous quote, publish or perish. These days, we want the journeys to be smooth. We have changed and say, publish and prosper. The P's are tamed, but they are reconfigured. So that's, Mr. Chan, thank you. I don't know what to think about that. Like my neighbor here said, most of the strictly serious issues regarding the scholarship that you so well exhibit in the work have been mentioned, and therefore those that are not worth repeating, I will not. I'll just mention a few things here and there. Mr. Chan, thank you so much for competently and diligently and expertly doing the job of an opponent here. Indeed, many of my observations, I entered them and I thank you for that. That means we are moving along the same path with our candidate and ourselves. I would like to emphasize first and foremost the title itself, deriving from what Mr. Chan himself pointed out. We are not talking about real life human beings that we shall extract from the streets of Mbarara City, as it is. We are talking about representation. So is it possible to think about the young adult in the title into changing to another thing, adulthood, something like representations of adulthood in? Because when you leave it as young adult, it reads like anthropological, sociological. It's like the writers are presenting rather than representing. If that's other panels and members, then that journey of the title can look that side. Secondly, is to do with the footnotes. I take particular note of the very first footnote, which partly reads the definition of the term young adult is always generated at because it's easy to state childhood stops and adulthood begins. In my view, this is a major thesis within your dissertation. And I think this should be footnote, it should be am I? I'm not mute. I'm okay, but maybe I don't know. Maybe it's the volume of the device. Maybe. Am I clear now? Am I being heard now? All right. Can I proceed or I rewind? All right, thank you. The very first footnote, which partly reads the definition of the term young adult has always generated a debate because it's not easy to state where childhood stops and adulthood begins, and it goes on and it goes on. In my view, the very opening sentence of this footnote is a very important thesis within your own dissertation. Therefore, I would propose that this footnote joins the major plan text rather than being a footnote. It's not, by the way. And I think this tallies with what one of the examiners pointed out about the definition of key terms, because the young adulthood here is at the center of your study. And therefore, I would suggest that you de-relegate from a footnote to the major text. Same as the footnote that starts with, in an interview with Mushenzi, an authority in children's and young adult literature conducted on 29th September 2019, he points out that he joined this field of inquiry because, and so on. That, once again, is important. You remember the opponent raising the question of your own values vis-a-vis the values of the characters that you are studying, and so on. So what are these values? He also pointed out how you incorporate those other voices within your work. I think this one should also join the major text. Finally, that footnote that begins with "mere place" explains this concept of the other, that. And when you go back to your work, especially objective number 3, the power dynamics, the notion of the other is so much of a frontline notion. And relegating it to the footnote, in my view, is doing an injustice to that very much. Let these people do the claim. Thank you very much. Thirdly, the problem statement. I propose that it gets tightened a bit further. There is a bit of casualness with which it comes to the reader, and this casualness, for example, most of these have done this now. Who are these most of? This is the genre most published in Uganda, thereby necessitating more attention to it. There's a casualness there. These are just examples, which I think can be tightened a bit so that it's more concretized than it is. The sheer number of publications probably may not warrant in itself a literary concern for investigation. Probably something else, like our comrade here was observing. What are those, structures of inequality and so on that are at play in those so much published genres, yet not so much studied so far. So concretizing that from statement, in my view, would be, there's this very important category of fictional demographic category. I read about 2-3 instances where the word fictional is repeated. Read fictional category. Was it a typographical error? Or if it was, then I think that's easier to address. All right, thank you so much. Then the theoretical framework and the conceptual framework, those two have been addressed. I would suggest that if possible, when the journey resumes from now, you could identify those key tenets that you think guide your study, harness them, justify them in the perspective of the literary concerns of YAL. YAL is an acronym for Young Adult Literature, and show how these tenets are specifically helpful for your own particular study at hand. And therefore, avoid this omnibus lumping of some aspects of sociological, post-colonial, or feminist into something that is not yet concrete. Because as you're aware, and many members here are aware, post-colonial readings are so multifarious, they are so varied. So are feminist readings, and so are sociological readings. So probably one of the comments from the examiner's reports could be helpful here. Getting those tenets and then bring them into conversation with some theoretical underpinnings in children's and young adult literature, especially propounded by those scholars that have been suggested, Peter Hunt, Jacqueline Rose, Perry Nodelman, and the others. Yeah. So I think that can be very, very useful. Now, next, conclusion, recommendations, and so on, my observation is similar to the one I've made about the problem statement. I propose that each of these be tightened and knitted so that they read in conversation with the research problem, the objectives, the research questions, and your theoretical framework. You are saying we should do this. How does it, in light of this, just tightening so that there is that conversation. So we start with and conclude with. Finally, your study is representations of what might become young adulthood in the fiction of selected women writers. You endeavor, and so competently so, to explain and show and demonstrate that the women writers are more critical than, you don't show us more critical than, they're just more critical. And as you know, literature, maybe other disciplines too, is inherently multidisciplinary, is inherently interdisciplinary, and is inherently comparative. By saying Ugandan women writers, you are not saying other writers. Now, the femaleness, maleness, the Ugandanness, otherness, I think there's a way you can get a sentence or two somewhere and bring it out so that we know we have been dealing with writers categorically Ugandan and specifically women who have written fiction. In the same spirit, the concept, the notion of fiction in the context of Ugandan women writers and other writers, to me, you could tighten it a bit further by elaborating it, because even, poems, dramas, songs, etc., are fictional. Artworks are fictionalizations of reality. So maybe you could qualify this fiction, the concept of, say, prose fiction, or you could invoke the notion of audience in relation to children and young adults literature, and probably somewhere in the background, somewhere in the introduction, or somewhere you find room for it. So that will tighten further the idea of the Ugandanness, the womeniness, as opposed to any other. Thank you very much, Alice. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, members here and the members online. I submit.
Thank you, Dr. Busimba. Alice, you will prepare, you will answer when all panelists have gone through, if you have anything to answer. I'm waiting for Dr. Busimba to mute. Thank you. Any other? We are left with Professor Elapu, and then we call our colleague who is out, Dr. Okot. Yeah.
Can I start?
Yes, you start.
Dr. Alice, I want to congratulate you first and foremost for your resilience. Research is not something that is confined to a period, but rather something that a scholar like himself do indefinitely. This journey, in your case, it has been stated that it's been going on for 7 years, and that this particular day is a special one in your life as a scholar. Not because it is an end of anything in particular, but because it marks a point from which you are going to continue the journey, especially toward publishing and sharing this idea that you in your thesis actually I can relate I worked the 7 years with you. That the most important thing from my perspective and my part is that the journey starts today. The journey of publication is the one where I might be more involved with you. And that journey is complex because it takes in all these ideas that have been expressed here. It takes them together with your thesis. It creates a composite from this work that we have done. It brings us all together. And it is something that I'm actually looking forward to more than anything. There are things that will come out that we individually or together has not quite put into perspective. But maybe those perspectives as you then act as the anchor that brings us together. One of the things I thought somebody raised today, which perhaps hasn't been raised, but it is there in the thesis and it is there in the perspective that have suggested that the road ahead will not be a rough one. The road behind, the hard work, I think have satisfactorily taken it up to bring it to this point. I particularly had wanted to see a battle with Barbara Kimeni, because there is one thing that Barbara Kimeni didn't do. She didn't have the time, but there is one thing that you do hint at that will have to be smooth, and that is conclusively looking at this thing of young adults as genderized. I think there is a need for some kind of genderization here, because there are certain themes involved in this which go into sexuality, go into problems of let me see if I can simplify this. Sexualization. Things like homosexuality as problems that the concern of adults, but in this context of scholarship, it goes into looking at how two areas, in particular, restrict myself to that. Two areas is where you specifically said that things like excuse me, as you get older, the head becomes it becomes more difficult to keep things there. But there are two areas that we need to be looked at, to be carefully considered, and the problems that are raising probably easier to sort out if we make these ones very clear and in advising you, make sure that we don't make an omission. The problem of centralization and the problem of nationality bring up some things that might have made Barbara Kimena a bit hesitant and might have made her provide cover on certain issues that might need to be brought out more openly for discussion and for advice to
Professor, be audible enough. Colleagues are saying they need to hear you.
they cannot hear me. My voice has dropped. When it comes to security, there is an area, a gray area, which has been created I don't want to overemphasize this, but when we put together all these studies, I think what Dr. Alice is suggesting here, and we shall be looking at that level, continue to see the that the young adults we are talking about here are of 2 genders, and they will continue to be of 2 genders because we cannot, that is something we cannot change. Nature did not allow us to do that. The male, the boys, and the female, the girls, are 2 categories, not in contention, not in competition, but 2 categories that we should continue to advise, especially media and advocacy in this situation. They are not children, and they are not fully grown adults. They are the people in transition from one to the other, and they are in some ways perhaps the most important sector because of that very reason that they are in transition and need to be advised on the way forward, on the modalities of growing, of becoming adults, of themselves taking up the challenge of looking after the other sector, the children, and advising them. I think it is this. I feel that maybe the author here, and she's the one who is responsible, not the researcher, for bringing this. Herself may have been affected by the fact that she was the mother of 2 boys. One tends to say that, is inclined to say, maybe the problem of the girl child wasn't foremost in her mind. But we cannot say that she didn't say anything about this, because I'd like to agree with Alice that her depiction of this one girl that comes up in her Moses stories, which is dominated by boys, is brilliant, and that maybe someone else needs to take the challenge and see if they can do that this particular author was not able to do, to extend the creation of this character, who is absolutely outstanding, and maybe write other stories, because these are stories that the children, the generation that is coming into this category would love to find more of in our literature. I'm sorry, I've rambled a bit, but I hope you picked up something from that. Thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead. Don't get tired. 7 years is nothing. Carry on, and let's see that the next 7 years will bring out of the book what you have written, what you are going to carry young writers to do, and please let's forget this thing that we always say that Ugandan society is not a good society, it is a lie, because we have seen, we in this room have seen that in fact people who to win more, rising more. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. We have one panelist, Professor Bengokot. Professor, it is now your turn. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible enough because the online sound has been a problem. I would like to recommend the candidate for the originality of this particular work. And the literature review was well done, and the citation of other works has been ample throughout the thesis. I think this is, despite all the other comment for improvement, which I think is good, there are certain things which needs to be done to improve. I will not talk so much about what others have already brought up, but there's one thing the candidate mentions, that the reason why she decided to study women or female writers is because there's a unique way in which women authors represent reality. This is repeated more than 3 times as a justification for the choice. So what we would like to know is, what are some of the unique ways that you found out that female writers represent reality as opposed to the male counterparts? Because this is one of the reasons that you advance. It will be interesting to know that. Comments have been made about the theoretical framework, the use of sociological literary theory, postcolonial theory, feminist literary theory. There's one thing which is mentioned in the introductory chapter. In the introduction itself, it is mentioned that one of the aspects which was going to be analyzed and studied is language and style. This is repeated in the statement of the problem toward the end, because say we look at the style here, and also it is effectiveness in that case, the language and style. So it appears as if language and style was meant to be at the heart of your study. Why did you think it was not necessary to employ linguistic theory to supplement your other theories in framing your inquiry? This being a literary work, a literary study, because language is a raw material which writers use in that case. I noticed that throughout your thesis, you have done a very good content analysis, but linguistic analysis, which would bring out a lot of things, seem not to be, seem not to have handled it as you did with the content analysis. Do you think using a linguistic theory or some aspect of linguistic theory to frame your analysis would help you achieve your objective, better to bring out, enrich your work? And there are 2 other things that I would want to bring up in my discussion.
Professor, looks we are missing your voice. Professor Court, are you still on? Like you said from the start, technologies. The candidate has not had those two things you wanted to mention. Maybe you can come again if you are still online. Yes, we've lost Professor Benge's voice. Maybe let's give chance to the candidate. When Professor gets back, we shall welcome him. Or we open it to the public first, or we first get the candidates' comments from the panelists. Okay, let us get the candidates' response. Then we shall open the discussion to the public, which will only take like 10 minutes, then we close. Professor, are you back? Okay, Alice, you can provide responses where applicable.
Chairman and members of the panel. Yeah, most of the comments, most of the supposed questions were actually comments. And the questions from the opponent were answered alongside the discussion. I highly appreciate the comments made and the review that was made by the opponent. I have noted the serious issues that he touched on, and I'm going to work on them. And the question of publishing, I want to assure you members that I am already working on 3 articles. I have published an article and some poetry. I am not going to sit down. I'm working and I'll continue working. And about the title changing to from the young adult to young adulthood, it can be done. I don't think it would affect my work, really. And the incorporating of some of the comments in the footnotes into the text, that one I will do. When we come to Dr. Carroll's comments, yes, I realize that there is need to particularize the characteristics of what I call young adulthood. I will address that, and pointing out those issues and concerns that trigger the writing of this young adult, things like the patriarchal ideology, things like civil wars and its effects, things like bad governance. It was actually done in the text, but if it needs more highlights and social inequalities, because whatever particular book was bringing out that issue, I would deal with it there and then where the text was, like a virgin for a king, those traditions that are harmful, a tradition like that one of a king having to sleep with a virgin before he can go and consummate his marriage, I would look at it there and then. It is a patriarchal, it is a problem from the patriarchal ideology, and I would deal with it there and then. So I really addressed those social inequalities and those problems that could have possibly triggered the writing of these texts. In Pretty Boy Beware, the dangers of tourism, even in the introduction of that book, it is there, and I even quote it. So they are pointed out, maybe if I need to put them like together, but I was dealing with them as alongside the text that I analyzed. Then for the unique ways that what Benge is talking about, the unique ways that women writers present reality, some of them are, yes, I should mention them. I just say unique ways and I don't actually mention them, like put them down. But there are things like the way they tackle injustice, particularly gender injustice, the way they fight off patriarchy, and the way they attack language of oppression. That one was particularly seen in Child of a Delegate, and those patriarchal ideas that are embedded especially in the minds of men, where when hero comes and says, let's
you. Yes, please. Maybe colleagues are saying your microphone is muted. Grammar check. Yes, Professor, now we are going to be brief. The discussion is now open to the audience. You are there, please be ready. We are beginning with Professor Elabu. He has now become part of the audience.
What I was going to say is that probably what Dr. Bengo wanted to say is that you don't mention the linguistic theory as such, but it influences what it is that you read, because that's how you interpret the text as a literary person. So it might be a question of just mentioning this when you mention the other theories that have influenced you. It is an oversight, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other people online? It's now your turn. If you are here and you are part of the audience, or you are online, please, you are free. I am waiting for the hand to be up. Yes, Dr. Busimba again.
So, thank you, Chair and Alice. I think this issue of unique ways, I think there is something that you can establish from available scholarship, that when women write, they inevitably write from a certain perspective because of what the other, is this Alice also? No, Caroline. What Caroline pointed out, the structures of inequalities. Those examples you are giving to us demonstrate how already a woman writer has been circumscribed as one of the members of those systemic inequalities in society. So the moment she writes, she's already writing from a unique perspective, different from the dominant voice of the male. I think there is a way we can make that part of the journey more smooth by buttressing that observation into some existing scholarship, and we move on. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. That was an observation by Dr. Busimba. Any other? We are left with only 13 minutes to finish our session so that we begin a smooth journey. We are ending a rough one. We are going to begin a smooth one. Any other? Dean Business had a view. Yes. I don't know if Dean, you are still there. Noel, yes. Dr. Noel. Oh, Dr. Noel has logged out. Any other color? Yes, Dr. Carlo now.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to supplement something on what Dr. Okot Bengi pointed out, especially on the issue of framing theory and when it comes to the linguistic aspects in our literary works. We could look at how these female writers framed those characters. And this framing, of course, is informed by those other other aspects that they have within them, and they help them, they make them create the characters in the way they do, and the society in which they are sometimes also contributes to the way they frame their characters. And this will help us bring out the representation of these, discuss the representation of these characters. Of course, we know we have different issues, as Dr. Busimba here was talking about, the systemic challenges. Even when we come to our recommendations, some of the recommendations come under the systemic issues in our society. If I'm making a recommendation, for example, to the tourism, to the education sector, some of them are brought about by the systemic inequalities or in the systemic challenges in our society. So we can point them at that issue. We'll come up or we look at those that are brought, or we can discuss under the cultural issues, those that can come under the religious issues, and we see how they shape these characters, these writers' representation of the characters that they present in the text. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Carlo. Dr. Ranjile.
Thank you, Chair.
You are welcome.
I join my colleagues and the entire for thanking Alice for reaching this stage. This is very commendable. And now we can see Alice, the journey is becoming smoother. Now, my question or my observation is that, Alice, how does your study inform policy? How does your study inform policy in this country through your research? Because we are seeing many vulnerabilities. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, the policy implications of your research, note it down. You will provide a response. I can see the mentor, Professor Gakwandi. What do you want to say? I think you are part of Alice. Professor Gakwandi, what is your view?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I was part of it, but I have learned something which I want to commend to Alice. That is from the external examiner's report, because he says, you know, perhaps she should change the language. She keeps talking about young adults seeking power and autonomy, and this somehow creates the impression that they are on a combative journey like a rebel force. And I think he recommended that, you know, he said that young adults are seeking freedom, maybe for entertainment, for doing what they want, dressing, reading, watching films and things. So perhaps if the language indeed was toned down, so that now we're talking about young adults seeking freedom rather than power, as if they want to be set free to do their own things outside adult life. And second, this is especially in the light of what Dr. Ochan was saying about the demographics of young people who are more than adults, as if they could make, organize themselves into power to change the social structures, which is not the case, because in most cases, young adults are not an organized force. They are operating within family structures, school structures, sporting structures, and other very limited organized structures where they want a little more freedom, where they want to be listened to. And I think that is something that perhaps Alice should take into account as she moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof, for the appreciation your team that is making on behalf of the panelists. And yes, any other? We are left with very few minutes. Those who are here and are online, please, you are all welcome. Any other with a view, a comment, a contribution? If you have a view, you have a comment or a contribution, please. Yes, Alice is going to provide some responses.
Dr. Ranjile, question about my work informing policy. Yes, I think my work inform policy especially Ministry of Education, in as far as taking care of, say, those schools. The private school that we have in the text is run down. It is a school that is almost dilapidated. It is a school whose compound cows can raise in. It is a school where the dormitories are, the beds in the dormitories are so squeezed that there is no space in between. So that means that there is need for government to put into the running of private schools and see what things are happening there. And in the stories, even there was no education shown, like there was no classwork being talked about. The boys are just doing extracurricular activities and they are engaged in other things. They even are made to cook. They become like cooks in the kitchen. So you don't see any studying going on. And we are told in that particular school that there was only one qualified teacher. So what is happening in the private run schools? Do they have all the teachers, are all the teachers qualified or not? So that is something that can inform policy. And then when it comes to Ministry of Gender and Social development, sorry. Yes, I think looking at what is happening, you know, through the reading and the interpretive, the interpretation of the texts like A Virgin for a King, where we have those customs, those social customs that affect young adults, like that one of the ritual marriage. There must be some other customs that we are not aware of. So what is happening? What is happening out there that is affecting young adults? So this government, the government or the Ministry of Gender and Social Development can look into such matters, the beauty contests, how are they being carried on? What are the preparations? Are the people, the ethical people, do they know what is actually taking place? And are they doing anything about streamlining it? And then also to National Curriculum Development Center, the books that are read at O level and at A level, who chooses them? What is the basis? Those, the ones at O and A level, most of them are actually young adults. They fall in that category, 11 to 19 years. So the literature they are reading, have any say about it? So I think those kinds of ideas can inform policy.
Thank you. Thank you, Alice. One mentioned that we are about to put a prefix. I studied some small English. We are about to put a prefix there. Any other comment, contribution, observation? Yes, I have two here. The one coming in next.
Observation. As you are presenting on your research findings of young adults, and even on some other literature review, you mentioned about the current characters of these young adults. As you were quoting, you gave some observations of young ranging 2020. Maybe I wanted to remind you that Under your scope of study, you built literature between 1967 to 2006. Maybe you could maybe review and put the current literature. Because somewhere, just something like yeah. Can I answer that?
Yes, briefly. We are now going to be brief because we are about to finish.
1967 to 2006 are the years of publication of the 11 books that I analyzed. But the other literature, of course, they are different ones.
Okay, thank you. No, history has how the data is collected and analyzed. Any other, Professor Elapu?
I just wanted to go back to that suggestion that was made about distinguishing young adults to adulthood. I think it's a good idea because adulthood is a condition that covers everybody, whereas young adults tend to facilitate. And I think these are individuals that we are going to concentrate on. But that is a title. The title is a prerogative of the publisher.
Okay. Thank you. Ideas also becoming smoother as we move on. And it looks we are about to come to the end. Any other? There was my good student, but she has gone. Our US was quite attentive. I don't know what was wasting her. She was the most observant person, but she left before time. Members, this is the end. Now I request us, our candidate, move out. Further discussion and further management. This is the time when we need to discuss freely. Yes, Dr. JB is going to manage our operation. No, Dr. JB is in charge. And now, members, we disconnect. Okay, but we have one panelist. Telling I am not the host. Members, you want to disconnect online, and unfortunately our visit is online, and we have the supervisors, we have the doctoral committee. What do we do? Madam Esther, if you are listening, can we request that others now you can log out? You remain with the doctoral committee, remain with the supervisors, the coordinator, graduate school, Professor Semakra, Director, Quality Assurance, please don't go. And those others, it's now time.
Dean, please. Dean, let's have them in the waiting room. They can put them in the waiting room. The IT people can help us.
Yes, even if you are not, you have to attain. Like my idea, if you have come to attain and you were invited, please, you have come in a crucial moment. If you were not invited as a member, or you were not, yes, Reverend, you can excuse yourself. No. You are key. You are key. Right. So we are remaining with the secretariat and the panel members. I can see online. We want to make sure that we have all the results. What do we do? Others are still on. Reverend Judith, don't go. You will lead the closing prayer. Yes. Okay. Dr. Now is open. Make sure if you are not among those who definitely the verdict will be published. If you are not a panel member and you are not among the category I have mentioned, please log out. Maybe you can remain deans. If you are a dean, please keep online. The rest, yes, supervisors are on. Doctoral committee, please on. Panel members, professors, please on. I am requesting
Dean,
I am waiting for Esther confirm that all others have been removed and only those that are needed are part of us now.
But even RC should be removed.
Madam Esther.
Dean, can we have one of the IT putting them in the waiting room?
Yeah.
Let's put them in the waiting room.
Okay, and we start.
People are still many.
We are discussing, can we forward the scores my secretariat?
Dean,
Dean,
my hand is up. Dean. Hello, Dean.
Therefore.
Dean. Dr. Barije. Dr. Barije.
Oh. Okay.
Dr. Barije.
Thank you.
Dr. Barije. Can we have all the other people in the waiting room?
There are 4 panelists. Forward.
Doctor, can you put people in the waiting room?
Doctor, wait.
Doctor. Dr. Barije.
Dr. Bengi. Professor Elapu, what is yours?
Doctor, wait. Doctor, wait.
Oh, fine. That's what I wanted to do.
Should have been yeah.
Okay.
Doctor, wait.
Doctor, wait, my hand is up.
Doctor, wait.
Yes.
Doctor.
Yes, Director, call the slides.
I'm still seeing Aris.
Yes, Director, Dr. Rwandi.
Yeah, remove Aris, put her in the waiting room. People are still so many who are not supposed to be there. We are still having about 27 participants.
Sorry?
You are still having many participants, including the candidate.
The candidate is here with us in room.
But now what we are saying, we have 26 people are online. 26 people are online. Therefore, yes. You can ask Job to put them in a waiting room. Let them be put in the waiting room, yeah, so that we have the right panel remaining behind.
All right, Director Quality Assurance is suggesting that we put these people in the waiting room.
Yeah.
I don't know what we shall do to.
And the job can do that.
All right.
Job
But I
Normally-
can see online.
Boy, are you there now? Remove
Esther, you can remove Kakama. Ayebazibwe Kakama, Alex. Esther, please. Who is blight?
Right. Remove Sarah.
Yes, please.
Sarah and Wakurata. Right.
So we are waiting for you, Esther. If you tell us to discuss, we are going to begin.
No, it's not yet. No, no. You cannot begin with 20 people.
We are still trained, I can see. Now, Esther, you can give us the powers so that we is ready to send them away. Yes, we are now moving well. We are now 16. Okay, Alice, Director, Benge, BSU, Asim is Carol.
Yes, Chair.
Yes, please.
You are still streaming on YouTube to the public.
Oh.
Maybe you cut that one off.
Esther, please, can you stop the YouTube? Esther, Professor Okot is advising that we are still streaming. Remove the stream and we do our business here. Thank you, Professor, for that observation. Esther, we are still on YouTube, please. Now for online members, this is okay, because now I can see we are 10.